Hi there everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to day 10 of Vlogtober 2024. So let me know what's been your most favourite part of Vlogtober so far. Maybe the tutorials, maybe the trips out and walks, just let me know. Today I'm going to be explaining to you how I put together my fabulous autumn bunting. Now, aren't those colours just gorgeous? I used a pack of fat quartz from Hobbycraft, so I will try and find that on their website and I'll pop the link down below. Now, obviously, I'm not going to show you how to make up every single flag, just a couple of samples, and then I show you how I attach to the tape at the top. Also, sewing tutorials using a machine I find incredibly difficult to film. So what I'm going to assume is that you have a machine. I mean, it's not impossible to sew up flags by hand, but it would take you forever. So I'm going to assume that you have your own sewing machine, and I'm going to assume that you can just do a normal running stitch with that sewing machine. So what I do is explain where I'm going to sew, then I sew off camera, and then I just show you the process. Honestly, you'll understand. I hope. Now I show you how to make these two flags up here. So I made up this little mini sample, and then as a bonus, because I was looking at this shape thinking, doesn't that look like a pocket? Now this is what I decided to do. So I made an advent pocket, so you can have advent bunting with pockets. And I'm really pleased how that's come out. So what I do to start with is show you how to make these two. So then keep watching and I show you how to add a pocket. So it's all neat at the edges. You can't see where I've added the pocket, but I'll show you that technique as well. So I'm going to add that video just here and I'll see you afterwards. Enjoy. So here we go. You're going to need your fabric. Now I've already cut mine out, but as I said before, this fabric came from a fat quartz pack from Hobbycraft. You're going to need some bias binding. So I've just cut off just a section because I'm just going to show you a couple of flags. But as you see, this goes across the top of your bunting. And I have already pre-ironed mine so that it's like this. So it's folded in half. I do tend to buy mine on a roll because I do use a lot of this. So this is from Trims. I bought this from Amazon and I will link this down below. The roll has 20 meters. You're going to need your template, which you can see is just a simple piece of paper. I folded in half to start with so that I knew that it would be symmetrical when I opened it out. I drew my shape, not very neatly. Then I open out and there you have your template. Now my template I know is going to be 1/2 inch all the way around, larger than my finished flag, because I need to allow for 1/2 inch of seam allowance. I then put this on my fabric and I draw around using a friction pen. Now you don't need to have a friction pen for this because we're going to trim the fabric so the pen won't notice. Oh, I can see I've broken this one. But the friction pens, would you believe, they're just from a stationer's shop. The friction pens, when I heat up my iron and I press, the ink disappears. So that's why I use a friction pen. But as I say, we're going to cut off the excess, so it really doesn't matter. You just draw around on your fabric and cut out as many flags that you need. You're going to need your fabric scissors to cut out your fabric. I'm also going to use my pinking shears. Now again, these aren't essential, look at them. but it's just when we trim around. I'll explain about those when we use them. I have my pins, and then across the table, not yet threaded up, there's my sewing machine raring to go. So as I say, I'm going to sew up off camera, but here we go. So for each flag you need a front and a back, and then what we're going to do before we sew is we're going to place the right sides of the fabric facing each other. You can pin them into place. I've just added a couple of pins here, or if you're quite proficient you can just hold them in place. And then what we're going to do, using a half a seam allowance, so using the foot of your sewing machine as a guide along the edge, you're going to sew half an inch, giving that seam allowance all the way around. So what I tend to do is I go forward, back, and then start. It just sort of ties that off. The same when I get round here, I go back, forward, then I tie off. So you're going to sew each flag up just like that. So I've sewn around. Just be careful when you're going around here, just do it nice and slowly to keep that shape. Now we're going to trim. So I'm going to trim one with my normal sewing scissors and then one using my pinking shears. Okay, so you need to be quite close going around, but I will show you a tip for this curved edge. So when we have a curved edge, what I'm going to do, this is what the pinking shears does for me, is just snip right up to those stitches all the way around. Now I'm quite close to the stitches anyway, but I just snip. Try not to snip the actual stitch, otherwise you'll end up with a hole. So we just do this around our curve. But when I trim with my pinking shears, that is helping. When I snipped on this one, it just means that you're not going to get too much bulk around your curve. It's just going to look better when you turn this the right way. But the pinking shears act in a similar way. So I'm just going to do this one with my pinking shears. So I've trimmed around both flags. I've cut my threads at the top. So what we need to do is turn the right way out. Okay, so you're just going to push that seam out the best that you can with your fingers. This isn't so bad when you've got a curve, and I do have a nice thumbnail to do this. If you're doing flags in the traditional way, what I tend to do is use a crochet hook or something similar to poke that point down. Okay, so I'm just going to turn these the right way out. Whoops. So there's my two flags, and I'm going to take these to the ironing board and just press them flat. So we're going to attach our flags to our bias binding. Now to start with, I count how many flags I have, divide that amount in half, and then I find halfway of my bias binding. That way I know if I start from the middle, I'm going to have an even amount of flags on both sides. So I tend to double sew my flags on. What some people do is just line the top edge up with the crease, fold down and then sew along. But I do find that sometimes doing it that way, some of these flags do come awry if you're sewing lots at a time whilst you're sewing. So I tend to double sew. Each flag I'm going to place to that centre crease on the bias binding, and then I pin in place. Make sure you've lined your top up with the centre. Okay, and then I'm going to sew along. These stitches will only be seen on the back. I'm going to line my next one up, so I allow about 1/4 inch in between each flag. It doesn't matter really what gap you have as long as you're consistent. So if you had 1 inch here, then you'd have 1 inch between each flag going across. So I've pinned into place, and then what we do is we just sew along. Okay. Then I'll show you, but then all we do really is then we fold down. You can then press again if you want to, and then sew again. So as you can see, I've just sewn them in place, and then when we fold this over, you do another row of stitches. But before that, I want to show you how to make up the Advent pocket flag, because I'm going to join this in as well. So I'm going to add this just along here. This is just my example, but I want to show you before I sew them all on just how I make that Advent pocket flag. So again, I'm going to have my 2 pieces, a front and a back. Then I've cut out another piece the same size. This is going to be my pocket, and what I've done is I've managed to cut a piece out that has this lovely robin there in the centre. That worked out well, didn't it? But what I'm going to do is just hem the top. So I'm going to fold over. This is about 1/4 inch, and again 1/4 inch. I've already pressed that with my iron. I'm going to do again, just finger press. Okay, all the way along, and then I'm going to pin that into place, and I'm going to just top stitch across. So I've top stitched across. Okay, this is the top of our pocket. That's made that nice and neat. I'm going to line my pocket up with the bottom of my front piece of my flag. I am just going to pop a couple of pins in to keep that in place. And then what we need to do, starting from the top of our pocket, just sew around. Now we don't want to use our 1/2 inch seam allowance. We want to be within that. So as close as you can around, making sure that you're catching both layers all the way around. What I do when I start off, I go down, up, a couple of times just to make sure that this, when it's used as a pocket, is nice and secure. But you're just going to start here and then finish up here. So I've sewed my pocket into place, and then to make this flag, we're just going to follow the same technique, right sides together, pin in place, and then we're going to sew around using that 1/2 inch seam allowance. So these stitches, where we sewed the pocket on, it should be within that allowance. So I've sewn and I have trimmed. Now don't worry if you snip some of these stitches that you made when you put your pocket on. They have done their work, okay? So they held the pocket in place before we put the whole piece together. So your pocket is now secured with our normal stitches. I did make a little mistake. So when we sewed the pocket on, I said, oh, go to and fro to add some strength. But then if you're going to trim that off, there's no point. So you didn't really need to do that. But what I would say, you can feel, so when you're going over with your 1/2 seam allowance before you trim, you can feel when you're getting to your pocket. So then I would suggest you do your to and fro, and then that will add some strength when you use your pockets. So don't worry too much. Those stitches did their job. My pocket is securely in place. So all I'm going to do now again is turn out. Let's have a look at that pocket. Okay, so you turn out once and then you turn out again. Okay, and then I'm going to press, but I think already, doesn't that look fantastic? So I pressed my pocket flag and then I sewed to the tape in exactly the same way. I've then pressed my tape again and then we're going to sew. Now you do need to start at the beginning of your tape, so all the way along, okay, and to the other end as well. But I'm just going to take you to the machine because I'm going to give you a little tip how to get this top stitching as neat as possible. So I do hope that you can see this. I have here on my presser foot a mark in permanent pen. Okay, I do lots of bunting, so I don't mind this being on here. And obviously, if this is not your machine, then don't do this. There is a notch, and I make sure that I line the bias binding up with that notch when I'm sewing. I'm not looking at my needle, I'm looking at this mark here, and as long as this mark is in line with my bias binding all the way along, I know that that top stitching is going to look nice and neat. So there you are, your finished bunting. But I think you'll agree, isn't this pocket idea fantastic? Now, if you're going to embroider on the front of your pocket or add anything, I would suggest that you do that before you put your flag together. Otherwise, it's going to prove a little bit tricky. Now, I've just snipped off my ends just so that I can show this to you. This is my little sample. It's rather sweet, isn't it? But what I'm going to do, I have those little pegs. I added a sticker to a piece of card. I'm just going to peg that on. So that's one idea. Now, I got the stickers from Hobbycraft last year, now with a 23 missing. But you could do whatever you wanted to decorate. But I think the pegs are quite a nice idea because you peg on the pocket and then you can put something little in here. So let me know what you think. I am so happy with how that pocket has turned out. So I may be doing that for Christmas. Now, if you were to do this and you were to do the Advent pocket, how many pockets would you make? Would you make 24 or would you make 12? So I can't decide at the moment. Now, I know a lot of you don't do that much sewing, but it's just something simple that I thought I would show you. So there you go. Today it was all about bunting. So enjoy the rest of your day and I will be back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.